Alex Rider, Book 8. Chapter 15. Special Delivery. Alice could tell that Jack was in a bad mood. She had made the breakfast as she did every morning, boiled eggs for him, fruit and muesli for her. There had been freshly iron jacket waiting for him in his room, but he was stamping around in the kitchen. Inside, so when she loaded the dishwasher, she slid the plates in as if she had put a personal grudge against them. He knew what had upset her. "Jack," he said, "I'm sorry." "Are you?" She lifted the toaster and wiped away imaginary crumbs. "I am, really." Jack turned around and let out a sigh. She could never stay angry for long, and they both knew it. "I don't understand you sometimes," she said. "We both agreed that Greenfields wasn't your business. You did what you were told and you were lucky to get out alive. So what on earth did you think you were doing? Sneaking into this film studio?" "I don't know. Just felt angry being told off by Mr. Bray, and I thought if I could find out what McCain was doing." "But what exactly is he doing?" Jack sat down at the table. You say that there was a film set, an African village, but why? What's the point? I've been thinking about that. McCain runs a charity, First Aid. They have appeals all over the world. Maybe that's his plan. He wants to raise money for something that hasn't happened. A fake charity appeal. Exactly. He shows a film of some village that doesn't exist. People send in money. He gets to keep it. Jack shook her head. "It wouldn't work, Alex. These days, everything is on TV or in papers. People will soon find out if it wasn't true." "Can you think of anything else?" "No, maybe we should just tell MI6 and leave it to them this time." She glanced at him. "Is that okay?" Alex smiled. "That's what I already decided," he said. Do you mind going back?" "Of course not," Jack replied. "I'm beginning to wonder where this will end. You go to a party in Scotland and you end up at the bottom of a lodge. A school visit almost lands you in a hospital. And now this." She took one of Alex's Marmite soldiers and bit it in half. "The trouble is, you've got too much of the spy in you. It's your uncle's fault and your father's, maybe even your grandfather's too. For all we know, he was probably a spy too." Alex looked at his watch. It was 8:15. "I ought to be on my way to school," he said. Yes, Jack nodded. "Let's not get into any more trouble with Mr. Bray." Alex ran up to his room. He collected his books and put on his jacket. He had lost his backpack at Elm's Cross, but he had a spare shoulder bag, which he dug out of the wardrobe. He was about to leave when he noticed the black gel ink pen that Smithers had given him lying on his desk on an impulse. He slipped it into his inside pocket. He knew that Tom Harris would get a kick out of seeing it. And if Mr. Bray told him off again, maybe he would set it off outside the staff room. He hurried back downstairs and out through the hall, calling out a last goodbye as he went. "Don't forget your scarf," Jack called back. She was too late. It was cold outside but dry and there was no wind. Alex hoisted his bag over his shoulder and made his way along the back streets that would lead him to the King's Cross. This part of Chelsea was full of elegant townhouses standing side by side and expensive cars parked in the residence bay. In a few months the trees would blossom and the wisteria would tumble down the brickwork. Ryder had liked being here because it was quiet and private, but still in the middle of the city. He'd always had the hatred of suburbs. Too many children and vets. Alex still is slightly crying remark. There was a FedEx van at the end of the street, badly parked around the corner, and two men dressed in overalls were examining a clipboard which they had held between them. They were obviously lost, and Alex approached one of them and came over to them. "Excuse me, mate," he said. "We've got a delivery for Packard Street. You don't know where this is, would you? Mike shook his head. There's no Packard Street around here. Are you sure? That's what it says here. The man held out the clipboard, inviting Alex to take a look. It was the empty van that alerted him. The doors of the van were open, and if they were making a delivery to an address in Chelsea, why was there nothing inside? Alex jerked back, but it was too late. Two men had manoeuvred Alex between them, so they were perfectly placed, one in front of him, one behind. He heard the clipboard hit the pavement. It was just a prop. They didn't need it anymore. Alex felt himself being grabbed by the throat. He twisted around trying to break free. At the same time, he saw something that chill up his spine. The second delivery, the man had produced a hypodermic syringe. They weren't here to kill him. They were here to take him. The van was for him. Alex put everything he had ever been taught into action. He knew that it would almost be impossible, even for two grown men, to drag him into the van, unless they made contact with the needle. That was what he had tried to avoid, so he didn't waste energy trying to break free of the necklock. He was too strong anyway. Instead, he used the man's own strength against him. Levering himself back, raised both legs off the ground and lashing out. The man with the syringe had been looking for somewhere to plant it, and with a smile of satisfaction, Alex saw the soles of his shoe smash into it, breaking it against the man's chest. They'd been planning to knock him out. They could forget it. Now it would be twice as hard to make him disappear. So far, no more than about 10 seconds had passed since the attack had begun, and Alex knew that time was on his side. The streets of Chelsea might be quiet, but it was 8:30 in the morning and people would be on their way to work. He couldn't call for help. He was still being strangled, but someone would see what was happening. They had to. Sure enough, a figure turned to the corner and Alex was overjoyed to see the blue and silver uniform of a police officer. Now the man behind him loosened his grip as the officer ran forward, and he gratefully sucked in air. "What's going on here?" the police officer demanded. Alex began and stopped as he felt something stab in his bag. Just above his waist, a second needle. The man who had been holding him must have taken it out of his pocket, but surely the policeman wasn't doing anything, and even as the strength drained out of him, his legs buckled. Alex understood. The delivery man weren't real, nor was the police officer. They were all in it together. Alex had been tricked, and there was nothing he could do, as whatever drug had been pumped into him coursed through his system. He saw the street tilt and then turn sideways, and knew that the only reason he wasn't lying flat on the pavement because the delivery man had caught hold of him. He was angry with himself. Only a few minutes ago, Jack had been worrying about him. He could have died at Elm's Cross, and she would never have known what was happened to him. He had promised her he would stay out of trouble, and now this, in a few hours, the school would report him missing. She would think he had betrayed her again, and if he died, she would never know the truth. This was all his fault. He shouldn't have gone to the film studio. He should never have gotten involved with Desmond McLean in the first place. He wished he could call Jack and tell her. It was too late. He tried to find strength for one last move. If he could lash out with a leg or even call out for help. It was already too late. Barely conscious, unable to struggle, he was bundled into the back of the van. He didn't even hear the doors slam shut. Alex opened his eyes. Someone was doing something to his head. A lock of fair hair twisted, falling in front of his eyes. At the same time, he heard the snip of scissors. He was sitting in a chair in what looked like a hotel room. There was a window covered by a blind, and at the very corner of his vision, an unmade bed, no carpet. Two delivery men were standing over him. They were cutting his hair. They hadn't tied it up, but they didn't need to. He was still drugged and couldn't move. He'd been taken out of his school uniform and dressed in an ill-fitting tracksuit. His feet seemed to be resting on some sort of metal shelf, but he didn't have the strength to look down. Two men were talking, but their voices were distant echoes, and he couldn't make out what they were saying. One of them noticed he was awake and grabbed his head, squeezing his cheeks between his thumb and his fingers. More of his hair tumbled out of his lap. He could feel the cold air touching his scalp. "He's back," the man said. "Good." A woman appeared from nowhere, and she must have been standing behind him. and Alex recognised Myra Bennett. Bizarrely, she was dressed as a nurse, complete with a starched white hat and a watch dangled from her front pocket. The diagonal fringe of yellow hair looked more silver than ever, and as if it had been sliced with a single sword stroke. Her eyes behind the round gold glasses were slightly mad. Alex's mouth was dry, and he was feeling sick, but he managed to swear at her a single venomous word. "We'll do it now." They took hold of his arm and rolled up his sleeve. Alex winced as they gave him another injection, a long needle sliding into the flesh just above his wrist. This time they didn't remove it. When it tapped it in place, Alex saw there was a tube connected into a plastic box about the size of a cigarette packet, which they taped to his arm. The box will continue to give you a timed injection of the drug we are using over the next few hours, Bennett explained. You will not be able to move or speak. There will be other side effects. Try to breathe normally. Alex had a wave of nausea. He was completely helpless. And whatever these people was planning, it was going to end in this room. The men rolled his sleeve back down, hiding the plastic box. Alex knew that was pumping its venom, drip by drip, into his bloodstream. He tried to jerk his arm, but he had no strength at all. He swore at Bennett a second time, but his voice was no longer working, and all that came out was an internal grunt. Ben leaned over him and pressed a pair of glasses onto his face. Alex tried to shake them off, but they were tight-fitting, hooked over his ears. "You can take him out now," she said. He was in a wheelchair. Alex didn't realise it until one of the men spun him round and pushed him out of the door. It turned into a long corridor. "Wait a minute," Bennett said. She crouched beside Alex so her face was close to him. "What do you think?" She asked with a thin smile. There was a full-length mirror at the end of the corridor. Alex stared at himself in shock and disbelief. His hair had been cut so badly that he looked 2 years older than his true age. Completely pitiful. The tracksuit suit was a nasty shade of purple. It was one size too big and covered in stains, as if he was unable to feed himself. His skin was pale and unhealthy. The glasses he had been given was deliberately ugly, black plastic with thin lenses. They hung slightly crookedly on his face. The drug had attacked his muscles, paralyzing him, and somehow changing the shape of his entire body. His jaw was hanging open, and his eyes were glazed. Alice knew exactly what they had done. They had turned him into a foul parody of a disabled person. They had made him look brain damaged, but worse than that, they had stripped away his dignity too. In a way, it was a brilliant disguise. People might glance at him in the street, but they would be too embarrassed to look twice. Bennett was taking their prejudges and using them to her own advantage. She gave a single nod, and Alex was wheeled down the corridor and round to a lift. After that, the extra drug must have kicked in because his world seemed to skip and jump. He was in the street, being lifted into a van. He was in the van. He was at Heathrow Airport. Hadn't he been in exactly the same terminal with Sabina and her parents? The lights hurt in his eyes, just as he had suspected. He saw the people staring briefly at him before looking away, ashamed of themselves. He tried to call out for help, but the low, pathetic mumbling that came out of his lips only made people turn away. They had no idea what was going on. They wouldn't even begin to guess that he was being kidnapped. Spirited away in front of their eyes, passport control. They had provided Alex with fake documents, of course, but it seemed to him that the official didn't look too closely. A boy in a wheelchair accompanied by a nurse. 2 men had stayed behind. Jonathan loves flying on big planes. Don't you, Jonathan? Bennett was talking to him, addressing him as if he was 6 years old. I'm not. Alex wanted to tell the passport officer his real name, but nothing resembling a word came out. Now he was in some sort of lounge, now being wheeled down a corridor. On the plane, a seat had been taken out to make room for the wheelchair. Other passengers were passing him, carrying their hand luggage. He saw them glance in his direction. Each time the reaction was the same: puzzlement, the realization that something was wrong, then pity. Finally, a sense of embarrassment. The drug was making his knee twitch. His hand, resting on his knee, was doing the same. "Try to get some sleep, Jonathan," Barrett said. "It's a long flight." Where were they taking him? And why? Did they really think that they could get away with this, whisking him out of the country with a fake ID? Jack would know by now that he was missing. The school would have rung her, and she would have alerted MI6. They would be looking for him. Every airport would be watched. Except what day was this? He could have been drugged for a few hours or a week or a month. And he had no control over his body, but his mind was intact. Sitting in the wheelchair, waiting to take off, he considered his situation. He didn't look anything like himself. He hardly needed the glasses and the badly cut hair. He was paralysed and travelling with a nurse, but he wasn't completely hopeless. Everything led back to Desmond McCain. MI6 knew what happened at Greenfields. Jack would have told them about Elms Cross. They would track down McCain, and that would lead them to him. They were in the air. How long was that possible? I just couldn't remember taking off. How long had they been flying for? Try to work out where they might be going. It had been light when they were on the runway, and it was still light now. If they had been in the air for a while, that wouldn't suggest that at the very least they weren't heading east. Different time zones would have brought the night in faster. South then. Ice couldn't turn his head. The muscles in his neck refused to work. But as the other passengers had filed past, he had noticed that many of them were black, dressed in clothes that were too brightly coloured for the UK. They could be going home. If so, he was on his way to Africa. Food was served, but not to him. The stewardess smiled at him sadly, as if understanding that he couldn't feed himself. Dr. Bennett brought out some baby food and tried to force it into his mouth with a spoon, using all his remaining strength. Alice kept his mouth shut. He wasn't going to be humiliated by her any more than he had already been. They were on the ground. The doors were open, and then Alice was being wheeled through an arrivals hall, and the person on the wall answered the question he'd been asking himself for the past 10 hours. Brightly dressed black woman with a huge smile, holding a basket of fruit, and the caption, "Smile, you're in Kenya." Kenya? Kenya. Vaguely, Alex remembered something that Edward Pleasure told him. He's a part owner of a business somewhere in Kenya. The words might have spoken a century ago, and on a different planet. Had he once been in Kilmore Castle, dancing with Sabina? What would she say if she could see him now? The plastic box was still taped to his arm, and he felt the whole thing vibrate as the timing mechanism clicked in, sending another spurt of the liquid into his veins. He felt unconscious for turning and didn't even try to fight it. He was thousands of miles from home. He had fallen into the hands of a ruthless enemy, and nobody knew where he was. Ahead of him was a set of automatic doors swung open, and Alice was wheeled into the dark. Chapter 16. A Short Flight to Nowhere. Movement return, one twitch at a time. Alice had no idea how long he had been here, but he had guessed that it was at least 24 hours. He had watched the sun rise, not out of the window, but through the cloth that made up the wall. He was lying on his back on a comfortable bed in what seemed to be a cross between a luxury hotel room and a large tent. The floor was made of polished wood. The walls were made of canvas. The windows consisted of 2 flaps, fastened closing from the outside. There was an expensive-looking wardrobe, a carved wooded table, and 2 chairs. A fan hung from the ceiling above his head, turning consciously. He was completely enclosed by a mosquito net, which rippled in the breeze. Where exactly was he? From the sounds that surrounded him, the shadow of monkeys, the occasional bellow of an elephant, the constant whoops and screams of exotic birds. It seemed that he was somewhere in the bush. that tied in with his memories of the journey here. And even if they were still confused, there had been the post he had seen. Smile, you're in Kenya. As if he had felt remotely like smiling. After that, a drug must have kicked in again. They had driven through the city, but he had barely seen any of it. It had been night time. Nairobi, and then there had been a second smaller airport and another plane, this one a 4-seater with a single propeller. They had bundled him in, leaving the wheelchair behind. And then he had woken up here on his own. It was dark evening all night, but they had left 2 little battery lights on. At least he could see, even if he couldn't yet move. The plastic box had been removed from his arm, and dirty plaster stuck over the puncture where the needle had gone in. That was the first thing he noticed, and he was grateful for it. With the drug no longer pumping into his system, he began to recover. He could lift his head. He could lift his hand. He could turn his head from side to side. Taken up to the sweep of the room, eventually he stood up and trotted on unsteady legs in the bathroom behind the bed, separated by a screen. He was sick, and that made him feel better. Then he took a cold shower, the water washing away some of the horror of the past 2 days. He was still too weak to make his way outside. He decided he would wait for the sun. Once again he fell asleep, this time more naturally. And now it was morning. I rolled off the bed and stood up. He had slept in his shorts. The tracksuit that they had dressed him was lying on the floor, a crumpled heap. He noticed that his school uniform had been brought over from England. It seemed somehow strange to see, but of course he had been wearing it when he was kidnapped. He went over to be feeling in the inside pocket of his jacket. Yes, it was there, the black gel ink pen that Smithers had given him. Nobody had thought to remove it. It wasn't as powerful as the device that had brought down the factory chimney, but it might still be useful. Anyway, it gave Alex hope. McKinnon had made his first mistake. They had used a powerful drug on him, but it had left his system completely. Just to be sure, he forced himself to do 20 press-ups. Then he had another shower. He got dressed in his own trousers and shirt, leaving off the jacket. Although it was early morning, it was already warm. He could feel the sun beating through the walls of the tent, and the fan was having to fight against the sluggish air. He slipped the gel ink pen into his trouser pocket. From now on, he would make sure that it never left him. The front of the tent was sealed. There was a large flap with a zip running round the side. Well, if this was his prison, it was a very flimsy one. Alex went over and unzipped it. At once he saw the green of the jungle, confirming what he had believed. He was in the bush, but the way was blocked by a guard, a man dressed in jeans and grimy shirt. A rifle strapped over his shoulder. I realized that he must have been there all night. The guard turned round and scowled. "You stay inside." That seemed to be the limit of his English. "What time do you serve breakfast?" Alex asked. He had already decided he wasn't going to let these people think he was scared. "Inside." Alex raised his hands and retreated. There was no point starting a fight, not yet. Breakfast came half an hour later. Tea, tinned orange juice, 2 slices of toast carried in by a second guard. Alex wolfed it down. It had been a long time since he had last eaten, and his stomach couldn't have been more empty. There was a bottle of water in the tent, and he drank that too. He had no idea what was going to happen to him. He would take any food or water he could get. Why, they brought him here. I just almost admired McCain. The man had nerves of steel, kidnapping him in broad daylight and smuggling him out of England through one of the world's busiest airports. But what was the point? McCain had identified him as the intruder at Greenfields. He would have remembered their meeting at the castle in Scotland. Maybe he had decided to take revenge after all. He had tried to kill Alex once, and yet somehow Alex didn't believe it. Whatever McCain was planning, the stakes were too high. This wasn't personal. This was business. McCain needed Alex for a reason, and now Alex was completely in his power. It was probably best not to think too much about what might lie ahead. Instead, Alex thought about Jack. What would she be doing now? What about MI6? Once they'd realised he had gone, they'd have spared no effort. Every intelligence agency in the world would be looking for him. Surely someone would remember a teenage boy being taken through passport control. Even if he was in a wheelchair, the trail would lead to Kenya, and they had to know that McCain had a base here. Except that McCain would have covered his tracks. He knew exactly what he was doing. Alex was going to have to rely on his own resources to get himself out of this mess. He would just have to wait for an opportunity and take it when it came. The tent flap suddenly opened and Myra Bennett stepped inside. She had changed once again and was wearing a safari outfit, a loose shirt and long trousers in different shades of brown. The clothes had made her look more masculine than ever. She was carrying what looked like a leather cloth. She wasn't alone. The third guard had come with her. This one in dirty jeans and black string t-shirt with no sleeves. Alex looked at the knotted muscles of his arms and the machete hanging from his belt. He had narrow, mean eyes. He was looking at Alex as if the two of them were lifelong enemies. "I heard you were up," Bennett said. "How are you feeling?" Alex wasn't sure what to say. Just seeing her made him feel sick again. "I've never been better," he muttered. "The serum that we injected you with was my own invention. I'm very pleased with the way it worked. It was derived from the water hemlock, which we cultivate at Greenfield. The effect is not dissimilar to a bad snake bite, only far less permanent. Can I trust you to behave yourself? If so, we can always inject you with some more." "What do you want with me?" I asked. "You'll find out in good time. For the moment, let me introduce you to Najenja." He gestured at the guard. "He's a Kikuyu tribesman, as are all the guards here. They will do anything we tell them. There are no other jobs, you see. You might like to know that Kikuyu once fought against the British with a ferocity that made them a source of great terror. One of their tricks was to impale their victims with a spear up their backsides, and then to leave them to die slowly on the side of a hill. Of course, they'd rather more civilized now. Even so, you might think twice before you do anything to annoy them." "Nice to meet you, Najenja," Alex said. Najenja's scowl deepened. "Where's McCain?" Alex demanded. "The Reverend McCain won't be here until later today. It's very likely that your friends in MI6 are watching him, so he's had to take a more roundabout route. But he's hoping to have dinner with you this evening. In the meantime, I thought you might like to come with me." "Where are we going?" "Oh, nowhere particular." Dr. Bennett smiled, her lips barely moving. "A short flight to nowhere." She lifted a piece of leather and Alex saw that it was a flying helmet. "You don't mind another plane?" "Do I have any choice?" "Not really. This way." She led him out of the tent. He was in a safari camp. The tent where he had spent the night was one of a dozen, each one surrounded by a wooden veranda built into the embrace of a wide river that swept around them. Alice looked at the silver water rippling past, a tangled wall of green rising in a steep bank on the other side. This really was a beautiful spot. He heard the chattering above him and looked up to see a family of grey monkeys leaping in from the branches of a juniper tree, using their hands and tails. Some of the mothers had tiny babies clinging to their chests. "The monkeys are a nuisance," Bennett snapped. She barked out an order in another language, and one of the guards standing beside the path lifted his rifle and fired. A dead monkey plunged out of the tree and crashed to the ground. The others scattered. "The guards are equally accurate with guns and spears," she went on. "They keep the population down." "What is this place?" Alex asked. He was careful not to react to what he had just seen. He knew it had been done for his benefit. This is Simba River Camp, a business that belongs to the Reverend McCain. I take it you know which country you're in." "Kenya?" "That's right." Another hint of a smile. It was as if she had forgotten how to do the real thing. "We're on the edge of the Rift Valley. Simba River Camp was once a world-class safari lodge with visitors from America, Europe, and Japan. Brad Pitt once stayed here. Fortunately, it became a victim of the globe residences. Visitors stopped coming, and the business went bust. Looking around him, Alice could see for himself. His was the only tent that looked habitable. The others were empty and falling into disrepair. The path that they were following had been neglected, weeds and wild grass breaking through. They passed a swimming pool, but it had no water, and the smell was crackling. All around, the vegetation was tumbling over itself, out of control. If the camp was left to itself for much longer, it would be swallowed up, disappearing into the bush. Nobody knew that it had ever existed. They came to a beaten-up Land Rover with dirty windows and wires poking out of the dashboard. Nagenda climbed into the driving seat with Ben next to him. Alice went in the back. He was moving completely normal now, and he was glad of it. Even on this short journey, he might get a chance to break away. 70 miles to the next camp, and I doubt that you'd ever find it, Bennett said. She must have been seeing what he was thinking. So please don't entertain any foolish ideas. The Kikuyu are also excellent trackers. They will be able to follow your trail in the darkness, even in the pouring rain. I'm afraid the Nagenda would enjoy hacking you to pieces. That's the sort of person he is. If I were you, I wouldn't give him the opportunity. They rumbled along a dirt track for a couple of minutes, passing through a wire fence with a rusting gateway through a wire fence with a rusting gateway and leaving the camp behind them. Almost at once they came to an airstrip, a rusty orange runway that had somehow been cut through the long grass. A dilapidated wooden hut stood to one side with a windsock hanging limply from a pole. This must have been where Alex had landed when he was brought to Simba River Camp, though he had no memory of it. There was a plane parked on the grass next to a line of about 30 oil drums. It was like an oversized toy with two seats, one behind the other, 3 wheels and a single propeller at the front. It had no cabin or cockpit. A slanting window protected the pilot, but any passenger would be sitting outside feeling the full force of the air currents. A single wing on struts stretched out over the plane. I saw a series of rubber tubes running all the way to the tips. These were connected to 2 plastic drums lashed to the side of the plane just behind the passenger seat. It was a crop duster, but a very old one. It should have been in a museum. I just wondered if it could really fly. This is a Piper J3 Cub, Bennett told him. She had taken off her glasses and was putting on the flying helmet, fastening it under her chin. She was also wearing a leather jacket, which she had bought from the Land Rover. Alex noticed she wasn't offering him anything to keep warm. 22 feet long, 65 horsepower engine. They used them for training during the war. Please, get in, Nagenda was saying with the car. Alex was feeling increasingly uneasy, but he did as he was told. There was a metal lever between the seats connected to a control box with 2 sets of wires running towards the wing. When he sat down, it was right in front of him. There was almost no room for his feet. Myra Bennett climbed into the front and made a few checks. She produced a pair of goggles and slipped them over her eyes to flick a switch, and the propeller began to turn. It took a full minute for the propeller to blur and then come up to speed. Alex could feel the high-pitched buzz of the engine in his ear and knew that from the point on there, there would be no more conversation. That suited him. He had nothing to say to the woman. Njenga pulled the chocks out from under the wheels and clicked on his seatbelt. The Piper rolled forward. They taxied all the way to the end of the runway, bumping up and down on the uneven surface. At least Dr. Bennett seemed to have been an experienced pilot. He spun the plane round, then raced back again, the engine straining like an overworked lawnmower. Alex wondered if they had enough speed to get into the air, but then one last bump, and they were up, the wind rushing past and the ground sweeping away below. Alex looked back. Alex wondered if they had enough speed to get into the air, but then one last bump and they were up, the wind rushing past and the ground sweeping away below. Alex looked back. He could see Njenga standing on his own beside the Land Rover, and behind him, separated by a line of brush, Simba River Camp. The water was now a silver ribbon twisting over. The far bank rose steeply, then sloped down again, opening onto a grey savanna that had fanned out to the horizon. He saw a herd of antelope, startled by the sound of the engine racing across the plain as if there were a bed of hot coals, their hooves barely touching the grass, a flat African landscape with its burnt-out yellow and browns had a true majesty. The sun was shining. The sky was a brilliant blue. Dr. Bennett had taken the Piper Cub to a height of perhaps 1,000 feet, at the same time tilting away from the river, heading north. Alice could see the compass on the control panel in front of her. He studied the landscape, holding up a hand to protect his eyes from the slice of the wind. They were flying over a sprawl of green, but there were hills ahead of them, grey and rocky, rising up to the east and west, and closing together to form an upside-down V. In the far distance, there was something that looked like a man-made wall, but it had to be a very big one if he could see it from here. Over to one side, he noticed a track winding up into the hills, and an electricity pylon. Had Bennett been lying when he said there was no one around for 17 miles? There seemed to be signs of civilization much closer than that. They flew over a wheat field. The entire valley between the hills had planted with crop which looked almost ready to harvest. And he could see thousands of gold blades bending in the breeze. He wondered how it could possibly grow out here in this heat. And a moment later he got his answer. The wall he had seen was damp, built into the neck of the valley. The plane flew over it, and suddenly they were above water. A huge lake stretching out to the mountain range on the far shore. And the water must somehow flow into the river. It would also be useful to feed the crops. Better manoeuvred. The joystick and the Piper Cub formed a tight circle, the whole continent tipping on its side. Alice felt his ears pop, and he was glad he was belted in. For a few seconds he had almost been upside down, and in a plane like this it would be easy enough to tumble out. They were flying back exactly the same way they had come. For the second time they passed over the lip of the dam. The wheat field lay ahead of them, less than a quarter of a mile away. Bennett turned around and called out to him. Behind the goggles her eyes looked enormous. "Didn't I tell you? I want you to pull the lever." Alice could barely hear what he was saying. She repeated herself, stressing each word. He nodded. Pull the lever." What was this all about? Alice wondered if he might be about to eject himself. If this hadn't all been some cruel and horrible trick, but he had no choice but to play along. If he refused, it would be easy enough for her to reach back and do it herself. They swept in low over the wheat, and Bennett signalled with one hand. Alice pulled the lever, and once there was a gurgle, Alice saw the rubber pipe swell and as liquid rushed through them, and a second later a spray began to burst out from beneath the wing, spreading out in the air and falling evenly onto the crop. He wondered why he should have been even remotely surprised. The prey was the crop duster, and that was what they were doing, dusting the crops. They flew over the field 4 times before the liquid ran out. Alice could only sit there, watching the artificial rain, completely mystified. At last, Bennett turned round again. "Now we can go back," he shouted. It took them just a few minutes to return to the runway. Najenga was still waiting for them, leaning against the Land Rover in the heat of the sun. They saw his head turn slowly as they approached. He had been smoking a cigarette. He dropped it and ground it under his foot. They landed. The plane rattled back to the grass and came to a standstill. Myra Bennett flicked off the engine. They took off her goggles and cap and climbed down. Alex followed her. He was glad to have his feet back on the ground. He stood there waiting for her to explain herself. "Did you enjoy that?" she asked. "What was it all about?" And he said, suddenly he was angry. "Why don't you stop playing games with me? I don't know what you're doing. You've got no reason to keep me here. I want to see McCain. I want to go home. The Reverend McCain will be here this evening. He will explain everything to you, including the purpose of our little flight today. But I'm afraid I have to tell you, there's not a chance of you going home." "Why not?" "Because we're going to kill you, you silly boy. Surely you must have realized that. First, we're going to hurt you. You see that there are things we need to know. I'm afraid you do have a very unpleasant time ahead of you. If I were told, I must get as much rest as you can." She unhooked her spectacles and put them back on. There was a brief laugh as she walked back to the waiting car. Chapter 17. Wolf Moon. As heard Desmond McCain arrived later that afternoon. He came in a plane that was larger than the Piper, with a deeper, more solid-sounding engine. I didn't see it. He hadn't been allowed out of his tent since a flight with Myra Bennett, but he heard it land. He had been on his own all afternoon. Only once a Kikuyu guard had come in, carrying a meager lunch on a tray, a couple of overripe bananas, bread and water. Alice refused to think about what the Bennett woman had told him. He had been threatened before, and he knew that part of her plan was to weaken him, to sap his strength psychologically. Instead, he used his time to collect his thoughts. It seemed like the crop duster had been carrying the liquid that had been developed at grain fields. But what was the point of spraying it in a single field in Kenya? Why had Bennett made such a big deal of it? I tried to join the Dots, an international charity, a dead African village, mocked up in a film studio, his own kidnapping, the wheat field. The more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. In the end, he pushed out of his mind and dozed off. He would let McCain explain himself when the time came. But the sun had set and darkness fallen before. Bennett returned to the tent. The Reverend McCain would like you to join him for dinner," she announced. "That's very kind of him." Alex swung himself off the bed. "I hope it's nicer than lunch." Once again they left the tent. The Simba River camp looked better at night than it had in the day. There was a full moon, and the pale light softened everything and made the river sparkle. A few lights were burning in the camp, but they were hardly needed when the sky was so full of stars. The air smelled of perfume. Cicadas were already at work, grinding away in the shadows. I followed the woman to what was clearly the centre of the camp. Circular clearing with the river on one side and acacia trees on all the others. And acacia trees on all the others. The wide branches stretching out as if to form a protective screen. 2 buildings were partly out of wood, stood opposite each other. One was a reception and administration office. The other combined a bar, lounge, and restaurant. It had a thatched roof that was much too big for it, and it, as if thrown over it like pastry on a pie. There were no windows or doors, in fact, no walls. I just can imagine the guests meeting here for iced gin and tonic after their long day spotting game, except the tables were piled up in the corner and the bar was closed. He noticed a satellite dish mounted on the roof of the first building and realized that there must be a radio somewhere inside. Might it be possible to reach it and send a message? He doubted it. There were yet more guards patrolling the area. They'd heard them from the day they were born. Guns and spears. It seemed a strange combination in the 21st century. Alice would guess that in the hands of Kikuyu, in the hands of Kikuyu, they would be as dangerous as each other. Over here, Alex. There was a raised platform close to the river, with the bonfire burning low to one side. The embers were glowing bright red, and the smell of charcoal crept into the air. Table and chairs had been placed on the platform, with 2 white china plates, 2 crystal wine glasses, but only 1 set of silver knives and forks. You're not joining us. Thus, Dr. Benedict added a couple of branches to the fire. The Reverend McCain hasn't invited me. Well, but you can do the washing up. Still making jokes? She glared at him. We'll see if you find this all so amusing tomorrow. He spun around and left him. It occurred to Alex that she might be annoyed that she hadn't been invited. He still hadn't worked out what her part in all this was. What had persuaded her to throw in her lot with Desmond McCain? Alice sat down. A bottle of French wine, already opened, stood next to a jug of water. He helped himself to the water. His eyes fell on one of the knives. It looked sharp with a serrated edge. Would anyone notice if it was missing? Glanced around and slid it off the table into the waistband of his trousers. The blade against his skin felt strangely comforting. He would use his bread knife when it was time to eat. He looked over at the river, wondering what animals might gather there at night. There was no fence, no barrier between them, and the camp he had seen monkeys and antelope. Might there be lions too? Despite anything, he had to admit that this was a memorable place. With a fire blazing, the African bush with all its secrets, he looked up at the night sky packed with so many stars that even in the vastness of the universe they seemed to be fighting for space. And there, right in the middle of them, huge and pale, they called it the wolf moon. The voice came out of the shadows. They call it the wolf moon. The voice came out of the shadows. Desmond McCain had appeared from nowhere, walking up to the table in no particular hurry. I wondered how long he had been standing there, watching him. McCain was dressed in a grey silk suit, black polished shoes, and a t-shirt. He was carrying a laptop which seemed to weigh nothing in his hand. His face gave nothing away. He sat at the table. And laid the computer down. Then he unfolded his napkin, and Alex looked at it as if noticing him from the first time. American Indians call it that, he went on. But I've heard the name used here too. With the coming of the moon, the breezes will begin to blow from the northeast. I've been waiting for them. The moon is the start of it all. The moon is so important for my plans. It's a name for people with an interest in the moon. I said, they're called lunatics. McCain laughed briefly, but without making a sound. The late Harold Bullman told me a great deal about you. He said, I was impressed by what I heard, but I have to say I'm even more impressed now. Any other boy who had been through what you have been through would be a snivelling wreck, far away from home, transported in a manner that cannot have been agreeable. And you're so brave enough to trade insults with me. First, I was declined to believe that the British intelligence services had recruited a 14-year-old child. But I'm already beginning to see why they chose you. Bullman is dead. I wasn't sure what else to say. Yes, he told me what I wanted to know, and then I killed him. I enjoyed doing so. If you ever learned anything about me, Alex, I won't be surprised. Surprise you that I have a strong dislike of journalists. McCain picked up the bottle. Will you have some wine? I'll stick to water. I'm glad to hear you. You're too young to drink. hear it. McCain poured himself some wine. Alex saw the swirl of the red against the side of the glass. Did you have a good day? He asked. Did Myra look after you? She took me for a ride in the crop duster. Do you know that she taught herself to fly? She never had a single lesson. She merely had a complete understanding of the laws of physics and worked it all out. She's a remarkable woman. With this over, she and I plan to get married. I'd say you were made for each other. And he drank some of his water. I can't think what to buy you. I'm afraid you won't be invited. McCain sat down and tasted his wine. He was gazing into the glass as if he could see his future in it. The meal will be brought over very shortly. Have you ever eaten ostrich? They don't serve it at school. The meat can be quite tough and you will need a sharp knife to cut it. I noticed that yours is missing. Can I suggest you return it to the table? Alex hesitated, but there was no point denying it. He took out the knife and placed it in front of him. What were you going to do with it? McCain asked. Thought it might come in useful. Were you planning to attack me? No, but that's a good idea. I don't think so. He raised a hand and almost at once something whipped across Alex's head and buried itself in a tree. It was a spear. I saw it quivering in the trunk. He hadn't even seen who'd thrown it. It would be a great mistake to try anything unwise. McCain continued as if nothing had happened. I hope I've made myself clear. I think I get the point, Alex said. Excellent. Are you going to tell me why I'm here? All in good time. McCain turned his head, and for a moment the flames were reflected in a silver crucifix. It was as if there was a fire burning on the side of his face. I am sure you would have worked out that I risked everything bringing you here. Of course, your disappearance has not been reported in the British news, but I have no doubt the police forces of the world are united in search for you. But I am playing an enormous prize. Alex, it is a bit like the poker game that first brought us together. All gamblers know the greater the reward, the greater the risks. I suppose you want to take over the world? I said, nothing as tiresome as that. World domination had never seemed particularly attractive to me, but dinner is served. We can talk further as we eat. 2 guards had appeared, carrying the dinner. They laid the food down on the table, disappeared. Alex was served with barbecued meat, sweet potatoes and beans. McCain had a bowl of brown sludge. We have the same food, McCain explained. Unfortunately, I am no longer able to chew. He took a small silver straw out of his top pocket. My meal had been liquidized. Your boxing injury? I sweated. It wasn't so much the injury as the operation that I went afterwards. My manager decided to send me to a plastic surgeon in Las Vegas. I should have known it was a botched job. His clinic was above casino. I take to you are familiar with my past. You were knocked out by someone called Buddy Sangster when you were young. It happened at Madison Square Garden in New York, 2 minutes in the middleweight championships. Sangster destroyed not only my hopes of becoming 3rd-time world champion, but my career. He made it difficult for me to speak and impossible to eat. Then I have only taken liquids, and every time I sit down for a meal, I remember him. But I had my revenge. I just remember what Edward Pleasure had told him. A year later, Sangster fell under a train. You killed him. Actually, I paid to have him killed. An international saint known as the Gentleman did the job for me. He also took care of the plastic surgeon. It was very expensive, and in truth, I would have preferred to do it myself. But it was too damn generous, as you will learn, Alice. I'm a man who takes significant care. Ice wasn't hungry, but he forced himself to eat. He knew he needed all his energy for he knew he needed all his energy. He knew he needed all his energy for what was to come. For what was to come. He needed all his energy for what was going to come. For what was going to come. He tried a mouthful of the ostrich. It was surprisingly good. A bit like beef, but with a gamier flavour. He would just have to do. He would just have to do. He would just have to do. But not to do his best, not to picture the creature while he ate. Meanwhile, McCain had leant down, was busily sucking. His brown porridge entered his mouth with a brief slurping sound. I am going to tell you a little bit about myself, McCain went on. This is the third time you and I have encountered each other, Alex. We are enemies, and tomorrow I'm afraid we are going to have no time for idle chap. But I'm a civilized man. You're a child. Tonight, under the wolf moon, we can behave as if we are friends, and I welcome the opportunity to tell you my story. I've often been quite tempted to write a book. You have the launch party back in jail. I'd certainly be arrested if I were to make public what I'm about to tell you, but there was no chance of that happening. McCain put down his straw and dabbed it at his lips with his napkin. His mouth was slanting with the wrong way, as if it had been further dislodged by the food. I began my life with nothing, he said. You have to remember that. I have no parents, no family, no history, no friends, no anything. The people who fostered me in East London were kind enough in their own way. But did they care who or what I was? I was just one of many orphans that they took in. They were do-gooders. This was my first lesson in life. Do-gooders need victims. They need suffering. Otherwise they cannot do good. I grew up in poverty. I went to a tough school, and from the very first day the other children were cruel to me. I can assure you that it is not a start in a life to be named after a bag of frozen food. I was bullied unmercifully. My colour, of course, was also against me. If you have ever been a victim of racism, Alex, you know that it goes to the heart of who you are. It can destroy you. So I came to understand that only one thing would keep me safe and separate from my herd. Only one thing would make a difference. Money. If I was rich, people wouldn't care where I came from. They wouldn't tease me or torment me. They would respect me. That is the way modern life works. I look at self-satisfaction. Satisfied pop stars, greasy, semi-literated football players. People worship them. Why? Because they are talented. Because they have money. McCain always shouted the words. His voice echoed across the clearing, and a couple of guards turned towards him, checking that everything was all right. Money is the god of the 21st century. He continued more quietly. It divided us. How to explain? My dream came to an end. It divided me. But it was no longer enough to have enough. You have to have more than enough. You have to have more than enough. Look at the bankers with their salaries. Look at the bankers with their salaries. Look at the bankers with their salaries. Look at the bankers with their salaries and their pensions and their bonuses and their extras. Why have one house when you can have 10? Why wait in line when you have your own private jet? From the age of about 13, I realised that was what I wanted. And very soon, that is what I shall have. But Cain had forgotten the food. He still hadn't tasted the wine, but he held it in front of him, admiring the colour. Balancing the glass in his palm of his hand, as if afraid of smashing it. Once again, Alex was aware of the power of the man. He could imagine the huge muscles under the silk suit. I had little education, McCain went on. The other children in my class, I sorted out that I had no prospects. I was, however, strong and fast on my feet. I became a boxer, a path which has seen more than one working class boy rises to riches and success. For a time, it looked as if the same might happen to me. I was known as a rising star. I trained in a gym in a Limehouse, and I threw myself into it. Somehow I would go there for 10 hours of a day. This was in many respects the happiest time of my life. I loved the feel of my fist smashing into an opponent's face. I loved the sight of blood and the sense of victory. Once I knocked out a man out, I thought for a moment I had killed him. It was a truly delicious sensation. But as I had explained to you, my dream came to an end. My manager dropped me. The press, which had once followed me and forgot me. I returned to London with no money and no job. I had to move back in with my foster parents. But they didn't really want me. I was no longer a poor little boy that they could feel good about helping. I was a man. There was no room for me in their life. My foster father managed to get me a job in an estate agency. That was how I found myself in the world of property. It was an area in which I had almost immediate success. I liked the company of estate agents. At that time it was easy to make a fast profit, and I began to do well. People might notice me. Back then you would not be a successful black person in Britain without standing out. And I, as I moved up the ladder, more and more businessmen wanted to see me, to pretend that they were my friends. People liked inviting me to dinner parties. They thought me as such a bit of a character, particularly of my brief fame in the boxing ring. Oh, and just to let you know, I am 8 years old, by the way. I'm going to turn 9 July 20th. Just to let you know, I'm just 8 years old. Some of you listening might even be 8. Might even be teenagers. That's what I expect you to be. Because everyone here should be a teenager. Because this is a teenager book. Just let you know. I made a large donation to the Conservative Party, and as a result I was asked if I would like to become a prospect member of Parliament. I accepted and was duly elected, even though the seat had been labor for as long as anyone could remember. Success follows success, Alex. I became a junior prime minister. Became a junior prime minister in the department for sport. My favourite sport is martial arts. I'm a world champion in it. I'm a world champion when I was 6 during 2019 or 2020. I was a world champion and wave master in martial arts. Carry on. Just to let you know. I would often find myself in the terrace outside the House of Commons, sipping champagne with the Prime Minister. The entire cabinet came to their fine vintage wine and macaroni cheese. I gave talks all over the country, and thanks to my property empire, I was getting richer than ever. I still remember buying my first Rolls Royce. At that point, I couldn't even drive. But what did I care? The next day, I went out and hired a chauffeur. By the time I was 30, I had a dozen people work for me. He spread his hands. And then it went wrong again. You were sent to prison for fraud. Yes, isn't it amazing how quickly people desert you? With a moment's hesitation, the British public turned their backs on me. I was thrown out of Parliament. Journalists jeered and mocked me in a way I was even every bit as bad as the boys I had once known at school. In prison, I was beaten up at school. In prison, I was beaten up so often that the hospital reserved a bed for me. Other men would have chosen to end it all, Alex. And there were times when I even considered dashing my head against a concrete wall. But I didn't. Because I was already planning my comeback. I knew that I could use my disgrace as just one more step on the journey I had been born to make. You didn't convert to Christianity. You just pretend. Of course I read the Bible. I spent hours talking to the prison chaplain and pompous fools who didn't see further than the end of his own dog collar. I took a course on the internet and got myself ordained the Reverend Desmond McCain. It was all a shame because it was necessary because I had worked out what I was going to do next. I was going to be rich again, 100 times richer than I had ever been before. Alex had left most of his food. One of the guards came over, took the plates away, removing McCain's unfinished food. Another brought over a basket of fruit. In the brief silence, Alex listened to the sounds of the night. The soft murmur of the river as it flowed past. The endless whisper of the undergrowth. The occasional cry of some animal far away. He was sitting in the open air in Africa. And yet he was just sharing with the table with a madman. He knew it all too well. McCain might have suffered hardships in his life. But what had happened to him had nothing to do with his background or his colour. He had been a psychopath from the start. Charity, McCain said. A very wise man once defined charity in the following way. He said it was poor people in rich countries giving money to rich people in poor countries. Rich countries. To rich people in poor countries. Rich people in poor countries. He smiled at the thought. Well, I have been thinking a lot about charity, Alex, and in particular how to use it for my own ends. He looked up at the night sky, his eyes fixed on the full moon. And in less than 24 hours, my moment will come. The seeds have already been sown. I mean that quite literally. I know what you're doing. You're faking some sort of disaster. You're going to steal the money for yourself. Oh, no. McCain replied. He lowered his head and gazed at Alex. The disaster is going to be quite real. It's going to happen here in Kenya. And very soon thousands of people will die. I'm afraid men, women and children, and let me tell you something rather disturbing. I really want you to know this. I can see the way you're looking at me. Alex, the contempt in your eyes. I'm used to it. I've had it all my life, but when the dying begins, just remember, it wasn't me who started it. He paused. Somehow Alex knew what he was going to say next. It was you. It was Alex who was going to start it? I'm shocked. Chapter 18. All for charity. The guards had served coffee, and McCain had lit a cigarette, watching the grey smoke trickle out of the corner of his mouth. Alex was reminded of a gangster in an old black and white film. As far as he was concerned, the habit couldn't kill him quickly enough. McCain stirred his coffee very still, as even the animals out in the bush had decided to listen in. There was no breeze. The air was heavy and warm. There are two ways to become rich, McCain began. And then there are two ways. You can persuade one person to give you a lot of money, but that means finding someone who is wealthy and stupid enough in the first place, and it may involve criminal violence. Or you can ask a great many people to give you a little money. This was a thought that obsessed me when I was in prison, and that's when I came up with my idea. It was easy enough to fake my conversation to Christianity. Everyone likes a sinner who repents, and it certainly is impressed the parole board. I was released a long time before I had my completed sentence, and I immediately set up my charity, First Aid. The aim, as I described it, was to be the first organisation to respond to disasters wherever they took place. I would imagine you know very little about international charity, Alex. But when a catastrophe occurs, the Boxing Day tsunami is a good example. People all over the world rush to respond. Old age pensioners dip into their savings. £5 here, £10 there. Soon adds up. At the same time, banks and businesses fight to outdo each other with very public displays of generosity. None of them really cares about people dying in undeveloped countries. Some donate because they feel guilty about their own wealth. Others, as I say, do it for the publicity. I don't agree with you. Let's cut in. He thought of Brooklyn School and the money they had collected for comic relief. There'll be a whole week of activities, and everyone had been proud of what they had achieved. You see the world this way because you're horrible and insane. People give to charity because they want to help. Your opinions mean nothing to me, McCain snapped, and Alex was pleased that he was annoyed. The anger was prickling at his eyes, and if you interrupt me again, I'll have you tied down and beaten. He leaned forward and sucked at his coffee. The motives are irrelevant anyway. What counts is the money. 300 million was raised for the tsunami in the UK alone. It's very difficult to say what a charity like Oxfam raises internationally over a period of 12 months. But I can tell you. That last year reached the same figure 300 million in Great Britain. This was just one country. Oxfam also has branches in a dozen other countries and sub-branches in places like India and Mexico. You do the maths. McCain fell silent. For a moment his eyes were far away. Millions and millions of pounds and dollars and euros, he murmured. And because the cash comes so quickly and in such large amounts, it is almost impossible to follow. An ordinary business has accountants, but a charity operates in many countries, often in appalling conditions, which makes it much harder to pin down. So basically, you're just a thief. And Link said he knew he was trembling close to the line because he couldn't resist reading McCain. Your plan to steal a lot of money. McCain nodded. Surprisingly, he didn't seem offended. I am a thief, but if you underestimate me, Alex, I am the greatest thief who ever lived, and I do not need to take the money, but people will give it to me willingly. You said you were going to create a disaster. I'm glad you were listening. That is exactly what I'm going to do, or perhaps to say it is exactly what I've done. The disaster is already happening, even as we sit here in this pleasant night air. He stopped out his cigarette and lit another. People need a reason to give money, and my genius, if it will forget, if you will forgive the world, has simply been to work out that a reason can be created artificially. I can give you an example. A serious accident took place last summer at the Jawad nuclear power station in Chennai, South India. That was a fairly simple matter. A bomb carried into the plant by one of my operatives. I had to say that the results were disappointing. The full force of the blast and the resulting radioactive were contained and did less damage than I hoped. But even so, First Aid was the first on the scene and received more than £1 million in donations. Some of it, of course, we had to give away. We had to buy large quantities of some sort of anti-radiation drug, and we had to pay for advertising. Even so, we made a tax-free profit of about £400,000. It was a useful dress rehearsal for the event I was planning here in Kenya. It also helped us operating costs. What are you planning here? What did you mean when you said I started? Well, I'll come back to you in a minute, Alex. But when I am planning, here is a good old-fashioned plague, not just in Kenya, but in Uganda and Tanzania too. I'm talking about a disaster on the scale never seen before, and the beauty of it is that I'm completely in control. But I don't need to describe it to you. I can show you. I am, as you will see it once, ahead of the game. And Beckham opened his laptop and spun it round so that Alex could see the screen. When the disaster begins a few weeks from now, other charities will rush to the scene. In a sense, all the charities are waiting for the bad things to happen. It is reason for their existence. We need to be faster than them. The first on the ground will scoop the lion's share of the money. So we have already prepared our appeal. He pressed enter. A film began to play. Slowly the camera zoomed in on an African village. At first everything seemed normal. But then Alex heard the buzz of a fly and saw the first dead bodies. A couple of cows lay on the sides with bloated stomachs and rigid descendant legs. The camera passed on the eagle, which seemed to have crash-landed, slamming into the dust. And at the same time he heard a voice speaking in a soft, urgent tone. Something terrible is happening in Kenya. The commentaries began. A dreadful plague has hit the land. Nobody knows how it started, but people are dying in their thousands. The oldest and the youngest have been the first to go. Now the camera had reached up to the first child, who stared up with empty eyes. Animals are not immune. African wildlife is being decimated. This beautiful country is in the grip of a nightmare. We urgently need money now to save it before it's too late. First Aid is running emergency food supplies. First Aid is already on the ground with vital medicine and fresh water. First Aid is funding urgent scientific research to find the cause of this disaster and bring it to an end. We cannot do it without you. Please send as much as you can today. Call us or visit our website. Our lines are open 24 hours a day. Save Kenya. Save the people. How can we ignore their cry for help? A fine image showed a grass stretched out in the graph. Five of its rib cage jumping out of its side. Through its side. Phone number and a web address was printed over with his First Aid logo. I am particularly pleased with the giraffe, McCain said. He tapped the keyboard and froze the picture. Many people in the first world just look away when a child or an old woman begs in the street. They'll repay for a dead animal. A great many giraffes and elephants will die in Kenya, and the next few months it should double the amount we receive. Alex sat in silence. Everything McCain was saying sickened him. But it was worse than that. He knew exactly what he was looking at. The African village on the screen. He had been there. He had stood in the same village when he had broken into the Amscott film studio. The only thing that was different was the backdrop. The screen so long it had gone, placed by swirling clouds and forests. You've made it all up, he gasped. It's all fake. You built the village. It's a set. We are merely preparing ourselves for the reality, McCain explained. As soon as the first reports of Kenya plague hit the press, We will come forward with our television appeal. There will be posters and advertisements in all the used newspapers. This will happen not just in England, but in America, Australia, and another dozen countries. And then we will sit back and wait for the money to flood in. And you're not going to keep it. You're not going to help anyone. McCain smiled and blew smoke. There's nothing anyone can do, he said. Once the plague begins, there will be no stopping it. I can tell you that will certainly, because of course I created it. Greenfield. Exactly. I wish my good friend Leonard Strake was here to come explain the science of it. But I'm afraid he met with an accident and won't be joining us. You could say he choked on a snail, except the snail in question was the marbled cone variety and deadly poisonous. I have a feeling that Leonard's heart exploded before I forced it down his throat. McCain had murdered Strake. Presumably he didn't want to share his profits with anyone. Alex filed the information away. He had to find a way to contact MI6. It won't work like this, McCain explained. He was enjoying himself and he didn't try to hide it. You don't seem to have spent a lot of time at school, Alex, but I can assume you've heard of genes. Every single cell in your body has about 30,000 of them. They are basically tiny pieces of code that make you what you are. The colour of your hair, your eyes, and so on. It's all down to the genes. Plants are made up of genes too. Genes tell the plant what to do, whether it tastes nice or not. For example, when our Mr. Strake and his friends at Greenfield were doing by changing the nature of plants by effectively adding a single gene, plants are more complicated than you might think. The information required to make a single stalk of wheat, which would fill 100 books with 1,000 pages each. With 100 books with 1,000 pages each. And here's the remarkable thing. If you added just one paragraph of new information, the equivalent of an extra gene, you would change the entire library. Your wheat might still look like wheat, but it will be very different. It might not be quite so tasty. For example, if you eaten with milk and sugar for breakfast, it might kill you. Do you see him going with this? I'm talking about taking something very ordinary and agreeable, turning it into lethal. And this happens in every kitchen in the world. Almost every day of the week. Let me try to explain it to you. I'm sure you enjoy potatoes. Boys like you eat them all the time as chips and crisps. It probably never occurs to you that you are in fact eating a poisonous plant. Not many people realise that the potato is closely related to deadly nightshade. Its leaves and flowers are extremely toxic. Sick indeed. What you actually eat is tuber, the bit that grows underneath. The tubers, of course, are delicious, but they can also harm you. If you leave them out in the sun even for one day, they turn green and taste bitter. If you eat them after all, you will be sick. That's why has this happened? There's a gene, a genetic switch inside the potato. It's completely harmless and almost invisible, but the sunlight seeks it out and turns it on. And once that happens, the tuber behaves differently. It goes green, it becomes poisonous. You have to throw it away. For the last 5 years, Greenfield's Biocentre has been supplying seeds to grow wheat several African countries. The wheat has been genetically modified to need less water and produce extra vitamins. But what nobody even knows is that Leonard Strake uses this particular delivery systems to add an extra gene to the package, like the potato gene I just told you about. It's harmless. A loaf of Kenya bread made of homegrown Kenya wheat. Homegrown Kenya wheat. Homegrown Kenya wheat. Homegrown Kenya wheat. Homegrown Kenya wheat, which will be fine. But once the genetic switch has been activated, though the wheat will look exactly the same, it will begin to change. It will quietly produce a toxin known as ricin. Ricin normally grows in castor beans and is one of the most lethal substances known to man. A tiny pellet will kill an adult. Very soon it will be growing all over Africa. The stuff I found is straight sophist. Alex muttered. In the test tube. You're very quick, Motley said. The more I get to know you, Alex, the more yes, that is our activating agent. Sort of mushroom soup. That is very important. It's not a chemical, it's a living organism, which is to say to reproduce itself. Again, I can explain to you this by taking you back to the kitchen. You place an ordinary mushroom on a piece of paper and leave it overnight. You'll notice a blackish sort of dust covering the surface the next day. What you're looking at are the spores. If they're released outside, spores will spread, a little bit like common cold travelling from one field to other. It may interest you to know that Irish potato blight of 1845, which led to the death by starvation, almost 1 million people was caused by a spore attacking the potato crop. I can see from your face that you're beginning to understand the exact purpose of the flight which took you this morning. You were kind enough to help Miss Dr. Bennett by putting a lever inside the piper cub, and when you did this, you sprayed a single field of genetically modified wheat with the activating agent. Leonard Strait told me that it would take 36 hours for the reaction to occur. So at sunset tomorrow, the genetic switch will be thrown, and the wheat in the field will begin to produce ricin. But that will only start of it. This is the season of the wolf moon. Very soon the wind will carry the spores to the next field, and to the one after. After that, nothing will be able to stop them. Nothing will stand in their way. The birds will be the first to die. A little peck of poisoned wheat, they'll look like the plastic eagle you saw in that film. Then it will be the turn of people. So it will be the loaf of bread bought from the local baker or wrapped in plastic on the supermarket shelf will contain enough poison to kill an entire family. But it will. It will too. It will have become a slice of death. Animals will die too. It will be as God has passed judgment of tenure, except that it won't stop at the borders. Greenfields has sold millions of seeds to Africa, Uganda, Tanzania, and all around the world, Soon the contamination will have spread across half the continent. Okay? They'll realise, Alex said. People know that the wheat is poison and they'll stop eating it. They'll burn the fields. That's exactly right, Alex. It will all be over very quickly. It won't even make a great enormous difference to Kenya. They'll grow to 125,000 tons of wheat a year, and a lot of their food is imported. But that's why First Aid has to act fast. It'll be in the initial panic. The first weeks that make our billions, people will rush to give money without thinking. What do you imagine they'll do when they discover that it's only the wheat that has mysterious developed sickness, that the plague can be contained? Do you think they'll ask for the donations back? I doubt it. And anyway, it'll be too late. By then I will have married and moved to South America. I already have a new identity waiting for me. I think I will have plastic surgery this time. I think more successfully. I will re-emerge as a slightly mysterious billionaire businessman. But I don't think people will ask too many questions about who I am or where I come from. I just know that when I was supporting the Conservative Party, when you are rich, people treat you with respect. McCain fell silent. Okay. He had completed his explanation and had sat back, waiting for Alex to respond. There was a sudden hiss, and one of the logs of the fire collapsed in on itself, and a flurry of sparks leapt into the night air. The guards had disappeared from sight, but Alex knew they would be watching and come in an instant if they were needed. He felt sick. It had been a final twist, a little act of extra cruelty to make him pull the lever that had released the spores. There had been no real reason for it. It was just how McCain had his fiancée got their kicks. So what happened next? He asked. What do you want me with? Is that all you want to know? Haven't you got anything to say about my plan? I think your plan is sick as you are, Mr. McCain. I'm not interested in him. I'm not interested in you. I just want to know why I'm here. Perhaps McCain had been expecting applause, or at least some sort of reaction from Alex. But he was clearly disappointed. His voice was sudden. Very well, he said. I might as well tell you. He has finished his second cigarette. He's ground it out too. I have been thinking a great deal, Alex, about how you managed to cross my path on 2 occasions. The first time was at Kilmore Castle in Scotland. You were with the journalist, Edler Fisher. Why were you there? I'm a friend of his daughter's. I couldn't see any harm in admitting the truth. He invited me, so it was just a coincidence. That's right. McCain considered for this moment. I was concerned about pleasure. He continued. I had been warned that he might be dangerous. And I wondered how much he knew about me. I only agreed to be interviewed by him because to have refused might raise his suspicions. Then when I heard the two of you talking about genetic engineering, you thought he was talking about his article. I sometimes wanted to laugh. I was telling him about my homework. He asked me how I was doing at school. I believe you, Alex. But at the time, I couldn't take any chances. If Pleasure had found out what my involvement with Greenfields, he would have put this entire operation in jeopardy. So you decided to kill him? You got one of your people to shoot out his tire? Actually, Myra did it for me. She was there too that night. Of course, there was a certain risk attached. But as you already know, I am something of a gambler. Perhaps that's why I allowed myself to lose my temper when he managed to beat me at cards. He lifted a hand and waved. It was a signal. 2 guards, both carrying rifles, began to approach with the table. Dr. Bennett was with them. The first time we met may have been a coincidence, as you say, McCain said. The second time most definitely was not. You were sent to Greenfields by MI6. There was no point in attempting to deny it. You were carrying equipment that allowed you to jam the surveillance cameras, that you also exploded a chimney on the recycling unit roof. It is therefore absolutely critical for me to discover how much the intelligence services know about me, and particularly about these operations. In short, I need to know why you were at Greenfields. How much of my conversation with Leonard Stark Straight did you overhear? Were you able to tell my MI6? I was about to speak, but McCain held a hand, stopping him. Bennett and 2 guards had reached the table. They were standing behind Alex, waiting to escort him back to his tent. I do not want to hear any more from you tonight, McCain said. It is clear to me that you are brave and intelligent. It's quite possible that you will be able to deceive me. So I want you to consider the questions I have asked you. I will ask them again in the morning. But the next time I put them to you. It will not be over a pleasant dinner. McCain leaned forward. I saw the ferocity in his eyes. Behold, I have the keys of hell and of death. And it says in the book of Revelation Revelation, tomorrow I intend to torture you, Alex. I want you to sleep tonight in the knowledge that when the sun rises, I'm going to inflict terror on you, such as you've never known in your life. I'm going to strip you out of your age and your bravado, so that when you open your mouth to speak, you will tell me everything I want to know, and won't even contemplate lying. Over this table you have made some jokes at my expense. You'll not be making any jokes when we meet again. You must be prepared to shed tears, Alex. Leave me now, and try to imagine, if you will, the horror that awaits you. Alex felt the two men grab hold of his arms. He shrugged them off and stood up. You can do what you like to me, McCain, he said, but your plan will never work. MI6 will find you and they'll kill you. Suspect they've already on their way. You're right about one thing, McCain replied. I can do anything I like to you, and very soon I will. Good night, Alex. I'll leave you to your dreams. Alex was taken away. The last thing he saw was Myra Bennett standing behind McCain, massaging his shoulders. McCain himself was leaning forward with his elbows on the table, his hands in front of his face. He looked very much as if he was at a prayer. Chapter... This doesn't sound like a good one, but I think it's chapter 19, and I am wrong. Chapter 19, pure torture. The sun rose all too soon. Alex watched the sides of the tents turn grey, silver, then finally a dirty yellow as the morning light intensified. He had lost his watch and had no idea of the time, but being so close to the equator, he suspected that it was earlier than he thought. When would they come for him? Exactly what sort of torture did McCain have in mind? He lay back and closed his eyes. He tried to fight off the demons of fear and despair. Backwards, he was completely in McCain's power. McCain wasn't taking any chances. There had been guards at two Kikuyu tribesmen outside his tent all night. He had heard them mumbling in low voices, and had seen the occasional flare of a match as they lit cigarettes. Once he thought he had heard the plane flying low overhead. But apart from that, there had been nothing except for the usual and eternal sounds of the bush, and Alex had been left entirely on his own, completely unable to sleep. And now he was close to exhaustion. He could see no way out. The sun was getting stronger by the minute. Alex thought of it beating down in the Simba Valley, just 2 miles to the north. The wheat would be growing taller, turning gold, and the deadly spores that he himself had released would be activating themselves. Before nightfall, they would be ready, and then the winds would come and spread them all over Africa. Alex's eyes flickered open, and suddenly he was angry. Why was he wasting time and energy worrying about himself? In a few hours, half a continent might begin to die. Eventually, the flap of the tent opened, and Myra Bennett stepped inside and dressed in white with a round straw hat, the sort of thing a schoolgirl might have worn 100 years ago. She had clipped 2 dark lenses over her spectacles to protect her eyes from the sun's glare. They made her look less human and more robotic than ever. She was obviously surprised to see lying on the bed, seemingly relaxed. "How did you sleep?" she asked. "I slept very well, thank you," he said. "Have you brought my breakfast?" The woman scowled. "I think you will find you are at breakfast." She gestured the exit. "Desmond is waiting. Let me show you the way." It's another beautiful day, with just a few wisps of cloud in an otherwise perfect sky. There was a familiar chatter above Alex's head, and he looked up to see that at least one of the monkeys had dared to come back, staring down at him with shock-filled eyes as if he knew what was about to happen. Birds with long tails and brilliant plumage hopped along the pathways. This was a time when tourists would have woken up to the scenery and thought themselves in heaven.
The one sight of the glowing guards reminded Alex McCain had turned it into his own peculiar version of hell. "It's not very far," Bennett said. "Please follow me." She led him out of the camp, away from the open area where he had eaten the night before, and past the landing strip. Alex was wearing part of his school uniform, with shirt, trousers and shoes. Even with the sleeves rolled up, he was still too warm. They hadn't bothered to give him any fresh clothes. He had just one crumb of comfort. The gel ink pen was in his trouser pocket. Even now he might get a chance to use it. He had no other surprises left. With 2 guards behind him and Bennett a few steps ahead, he was taken down a path that followed the curve of the river. The camp disappeared. Behind them in the far distance, Alex saw a family of elephants washing themselves in the sparkling water. It was an extraordinary sight, but he couldn't enjoy it, not when it might be the last thing he ever saw. Desmond McCain was waiting ahead of them, dressed comfortably in a well-tailored safari suit, with a Wilk silk cravat. It seemed they had arrived at their destination. Alex looked around him. He didn't like what he saw. The steep slope ran down to a stretch of sandy shingle, and now a beach at the very edge of the water. There was a step ladder, 3 or 4 meters high, standing on the beach, and above it a metal pipe that had been fastened to the branch of a tree. The pipe ended with 2 handles and reminded Alex of a periscope in a submarine. But an observation platform had been constructed at the top of the slope. This was where McCain was standing. Alex had already worked out what might be going on here and was making calculations. If he walked down to the beach and climbed the ladder, he would be able to reach the handles. Then the ladder could be taken away, and he would be left hanging from the pipe. He would be close enough to the platform to be able to talk to McCain and to hear what he had to say, but not close enough to reach him because the pipe was rigid. He wouldn't be able to swing back and forth. In other words, he would simply have to stay there until his arms grew tired and he dropped. The question was why? What was the point? This will not take very long, Alex, McCain said. He had watched Alex taking everything in. I will talk to you a little bit, and then I'm afraid we will begin. As I already have told you, I am most certainly the answer to questions which I put to you last night. What was it that brought you to Greenfields? Why did MI6 send you, and how much did the intelligence service know about Poison Dawn? I sort of decided what he was going to say. You don't need to play sadistic games, Mr. Mc. You don't need to play your sadistic games, Mr. McCain, he said. I'll tell you what you want to know anyway. McCain held up a hand. I don't think you were listening to me during dinner. Of course you'll tell me what I want to hear. That is the point I'm trying to make. You'll tell me everything to protect yourself, but have to be 100% certain that you are telling me the truth. There cannot be even the tiniest margin of doubt. And you think torturing me will achieve that? Normally, no. There are horrible things I could do to you, Alex. We have electricity here, and wires attached to various parts of your body would produce excruciating pain. My QU friends could take you far beyond the limits of endurance using only their spears, perhaps heated first in the flames of fire. We could cut pieces of you. We could boil you alive. And do not think for a single minute that I'll hesitate doing any of this because you are only 14. And I clearly do not think of you as a child. So why should I? Is part of the torture boring me to death? Alex asked. Okay, nodded. Bravely spoken, Alex. Let us see how brave you are 10 minutes from now. He took out a handkerchief and wiped his brow. The sun was beating down on his bald head, and beads of sweat were standing out. The pain that you are about to experience is going to be all the worse, because you are inflicting it on yourself. You will, as it were, recuperate with your tortures. And you will do so to escape the terror that lies below. He took out a gun, an old-fashioned Morser, with a shortened barrel and a white ivory grip. It looked like something out of a museum. I would like you to go now to the river, he explained. If you refuse so to, if you attempt to run away, I will shoot you through the knee. Alex stayed where he was. Bennett was still smiling, probably for the first time, and he realized she knew what to expect, that she had seen this all before. The two guards were covering him with their rifles. If McCain missed his pistol, they would certainly shoot him before he'd taken a single step. He glanced at the beach and the river. There was nobody else down there. He had a nasty feeling he was going to be alone for long. "I'm waiting, Alex," McCain said. Without speaking, Alex made his way down the slope. Now McCain and the others were directly above him, looking down from the protected height of the observation platform. Alex was reminded of a Roman emperor and his entourage. They were in the imperial stand. He was the gladiator about to entertain them. What about the ladder and the steel pipe? He was beginning to see their purpose too. "This is part of the River Simba," McCain explained. "It runs all the way up to the Simba Dam and Lake Simba beyond. It is water from this river that feeds my wheat field, Alex, and as you are allowed to learn, it is infested with crocodiles." Here comes one now," Bennett crowded. Crocodiles. He turned to see a little dark shape on the opposite bank, darted forward and launched itself into the water. Followed quickly by a second. There was something strictly evil about the way they moved. They twisted and sliced through the water like two knife wounds, and somehow they managed to swim or slid very quickly without seeming to be in a hurry. They would cross the river in less than a minute. Somehow they knew he was here. But of course they had been fed this way before. Alice looked up. Bennett was gazing at him with her mouth open. He could see the saliva glistening on her lips and tongue. McCain was next to her, his gun held loosely, watching with interest. Alice glanced back. Crocodiles were halfway across the river. He wanted to run, but he knew he would be gunned down if he tried. Nor will everything allowed onto the safety of the platform. Everything had been carefully arranged. There was only one way of escape: sick with himself, knowing that he would do exactly what McCain wanted. He stepped onto the ladder. He was trying not to panic, but every instinct was driving him up, out of harm's way. As he drew near to the top, he felt the whole structure tremble beneath him. For one terrible moment, he thought he was going to fall. Somehow he managed to steady himself near the top, even as the first crocodile heaved itself out of the water and began to crawl towards him. Alex turned back and looked at it. It was a mistake. In an instant he felt the terror that McCain promised him, the deep-rooted fear of this ancient monster that had to be quiet into every human being. The crocodile emerged. The crocodile that had just emerged was almost twice its own size, with an ugly snout to the writhing tip of its tail. Its great jaws were open, the two eyes of ferocious white teeth when it snapped shut on his arm or leg. That was how they operated. Of course, clamping down on their victims, and they dragged them back into the water. And only when the bones were loose and flesh had begun to decompose, they would start their feast. But worst of all were their eyes, midnight black, snake-like, and swollen on the sides of its head. Surely too small for its body, and filled with hatred. They really were the eyes of death. It said those crocodiles wept as they attacked their prey, but it would be no pity in those eyes. They were part of a machine that existed only to kill. The second crocodile was a little smaller and much quicker. I saw it overtake the others, scuttling over the shingle of its short, squat legs and the way to the foot of the ladder. He climbed the last 3 steps, using his hands to steady at the top. He felt he could imagine it smashing into the shingle, perhaps breaking an ankle or a leg, and then be torn apart by the two animals as they fought over him. There could be no more horrible death. The crocodile threw itself at the ladder, and the whole frame shuddered. How many people have McCain terrorized in this way? Alex looked up. He still wasn't level with the observation platform. He knew what he had to do. With dreadful care, he balanced himself on the highest step. The handles at the end of the pipe were directly above him. Swaying, using his arms to steady himself, reached out and grabbed hold of them. His fingers closed around them. You realized the larger crocodile reared, hurled up its entire weight against the ladder. The whole thing came crashing down. Alex was left dangling in space. Now he saw how McCain had arranged this. He was facing McCain, the two of them about 1.5 meters apart. The crocodiles were directly underneath Alex, climbing on top of each other, snapping at the air. For the moment he was safe, but he was stretched out, hanging his face clean to the pipe by his fingers. His wrists and arms were already feeling the strain, and they supported his entire body weight. And the burn of his lactic Acid was building up in his shoulders. It was just as McCain said. He was the one causing himself the pain. And it would get worse the longer he hung there. In the end, of course, he would have to let go. That was the only horror of it. Once he dropped, there would only be more pain and then death. How long did he have? The longest anyone has ever remained where you are is 18 minutes. McCain said. He spoke slowly and evenly. He didn't have to raise his voice to make himself heard. The man is question lost. His sanity before the end. He was giggling as he fell. But you, Alex, you have one hope, one chance of survival. My men can shoot at the crocodiles and scare them away. But first you have to answer my questions, and I have to believe you. If you can make that happen, then you'll be safe. Alex swore. It was difficult to speak. All his concentration was fixed on his hands, the increasing pain in his arms, then the need not to let go. I dislike the sort of language, Alex, McCain said. I am, after all, an ordained priest. Would you like me to go back or go away for 5 minutes and come back when you're in a better frame of mind? The crocodile lunged towards him. Instinctively, Ice pulled his legs up, tucking his knees in towards his stomach. The movement was extra strain on his arms. He actually heard the jaws of the animal snap together as he knew they could only be inches away from his teeth and his ankles. No! He shouted. His voice was strangled. He didn't like the sound of his mouth. He had to get this over with. Ask me what you want. He'd been hanging for less than a minute. It felt longer. He would never manage another 5 left alone without another 17. In his desperation, he found himself twisting. His arms crossed and he had to jerk his body back round to bring himself face to face with McCain. The first question, then, McCain said. Speaking deliberately slowly, he knew that every second only added to the torture. Why were you at Greenfields? It was a cool school trip. You're still lying to me, Alex. I'm going to leave you for a little while. McCain turned his back on Alex and walked away. At the same time, Alex heard a strange pig-like grunting. Looked down below on the beach. Crocodiles were writhing together in frenzy, claws and scales, eyes to teeth. It's the truth! Alex shouted after him. His hands were sweating, but it was even more difficult. Cut to him. It was a geography project, but then MI6 asked me to help him. They weren't interested in you. It was Leonard Strake. McCain turned back to go on. There was someone in Greenfields, an informer. What was his name? I stopped back deliberately. Philip Masters. He's gone to the police and then he got killed. That was why they wanted to find out about Strake. You broke into a computer? They gave me a memory stick. That was all they asked me to do. What about Poison Dawn? They never said anything about Poison Dawn. They never even mentioned it to me. I'm telling you, that's all they only knew about you and Strake when I told them I'd seen you together. That was very unfortunate. What else did you tell them? I told them I heard the two of you talking, but I didn't say anything that made any sense. I gave them stuff I found in Strake's office to Alex. It was as if his arms were being torn out of his shoulders. He didn't dare look at crocodiles below. But I never spoke to them again. I didn't know why. I don't know what they know. They don't know anything. McCain let him dangle in silence. 10 seconds dragged to 20 and then to half a minute. Alex felt every one of them. He could feel his bones wrenching in the socket. He knew McCain was doing this on purpose. He was staring straight into Alex's eyes and trying to read what was going on inside his mind. Alex tried to ease into his grip, but his palms were so slippery that the smallest movement would make him fall. Dr. Bennett edged closer to him. He was breathing heavily and watching Alex struggle with evident delight. He could see himself reflected in the dark circles of her glasses. The silence stretched out. Alex could smell the crocodiles, a deep sickly odour of stale fish, and decayed meat that rose up and crept into his nostrils. He was finding it difficult to breathe. The pain was getting worse and worse. All the muscles in his upper body were burning. I believe you, McCain said at last. You are telling the truth. Then get rid of them. Alex jerked his head towards the crocodile. They had been silent and I was utter still, watching him with something like a smile, as if they had all the time in the world. But the moment they made eye contact, seemed to sense it. They both leapt up and launching themselves at Alex's feet. And if he hadn't immediately coiled himself into a ball, drawing his knees up, they would have had him. Crocodiles fell back and lay still, one across the other. They knew it was only a matter of time before they got what they wanted. In a long pause, Alex's arms screamed. I'm afraid I've changed my mind. What? Alex shouted the word. You've annoyed me very much, Alex. I nearly killed you when you were in Scotland, and it would have been a lot better if I had. Your activities at the Greenfields were nearly brought an end to operation that had taken me 5 years and a great deal of money to develop. Thanks to you, my name is now known to MI6. That'll make my future life more difficult, and added to that, I think you will deserve to die. Turn to Myra Bennett. I know you'll be interested to know many minutes he's managed to hang on before he falls. I somehow doubt that she'll beat the record. The woman took out her mobile. I shall take photographs for you, Desi. McLean took one last look at Alex. I hope you die painfully, he said, because although you have not lived long, I really think you deserve an unpleasant death. He signalled to the guards and the three of them walked away. He had given his gun to Dr. Bennett. She was still holding it in one hand. The mobile phone in the other. Behind him, I saw a splash. The third crocodile had launched itself into the river and was already wriggling in its way across. 4 minutes, the woman glanced at her watch. I do not think you will make 5. And she was right. Everything was paid. With every second the pain was getting worse. Alex couldn't swing to safety. He couldn't climb, he couldn't move, he could only fall. Close to life, and very soon he would do just that. Chapter 20. Raw Deal. 7 minutes, maybe 8 minutes. Alex wasn't even sure how long he was hanging anymore. His whole body was raked with pain, blood, and pounding in his ears and behind his eyes. With every second that passed, his strength was draining out of his arms. He tried to accept what was about to happen. His fingers slipped off the handles. As the short fall down to the riverbank, the jarring impact, and then the final horror as the crocodiles attacked. Myra Bennett leant over. Do you have any last words? She said. Any goodbyes you want to make? I can record them for you. She held out her phone. What in hell? Alex's eyes felt as if they were swollen shut, but he forced them open, staring straight at her. You are the one on the way to hell, my dear, she said, her eyes widened. She took a step towards him, as if something had surprised her. Once again he opened her mouth, and instead Alex thought she was about to speak, but instead a stream of blood poured out her lower lip. A moment later she pitched forward and fell. Alex glimpsed the hilt of a knife just sticking out of her back, deliberately clinging onto the handles. He corkscrewed round and looked down. The woman had landed in the middle of the crocodiles. She was still alive. He heard her scream as she was torn apart, her arms and legs being pulled in 3 directions. He turned away. He couldn't watch anymore. He was going to join her. His own strength was gone. His grip loosening. Suddenly there was a man out on the observation platform reaching up towards him. Even as Alice wondered where the man had come from. Then he seen them somewhere before. Alex, the man whispered. Take my hand. I can't reach. One last effort. You can make it. The distance was too great. Alex would have to let go of one hand and throw himself sideways, reaching in with it. If he miscalculated or if the man was tricking him, that would be it. The crocodile was get a second feed. No! The man couldn't shout. They were too close to the camp. His voice was out in a whisper. Alex did it as he was told, stretching out as far as he could. Every muscle to propel his body from the handles. The man was leaning out. Somehow, just when Alex was certain he was falling, they managed to lock together wrist and hand over wrist. Okay, I've got you. I'll take your weight. As they go of the other handle, he felt the man pull him towards the platform. Even so, there was only one dreadful moment when he was sure they had overbalanced and they would fall together. He came crashing down, but he was right on the edge on the platform. He clawed at the wooden planks and managed to find some purchase. His legs were dangling below him, but then he pulled himself forward and rolled onto his side. He was lying next to the man who had just rescued him. He was safe. For a few seconds he lay in silence, recovering his breath and waiting for him jangling nerves to calm down. Then he looked up. The man was Asian, young, with very dark skin and close-cropped hair, dressed in camouflage khakis. From his harmless 3 knives strapped across his chest. One knife was missing. Alex knew him at once. With a sense of astonishment, he remembered where they had met before. It was the man from Lot's Arcade, the driver of the white van who had appeared from nowhere when he had crawled out of the freezing water. He had driven Alex and Sabina and Edward Pleasure to hospital. Now he was here. What sort of guardian angel Was he waiting on two sides of the world? Who are you? Alex asked. My name is Rahim, the man said. But now we must leave. When they find the woman is missing, they will come looking for her. Here, give me your shirt. Alex didn't know what the man was thinking, but there was no time for an argument. He stripped off his school shirt and handed it to him. Rahim took a second knife out and cut the shirts to shreds, then tossed it down to the crocodiles. There were now only two of them on the beach, fighting over what was left of the woman. The third one had returned to the river, dragging part of her with it. Pieces of Alex's shirt fluttered down on the riverbank. It may fool them, Rahim said. It may not. Let's go. Go where? I have a camp. I followed Rahim off the platform and away from the river, heading into the bush. He was alarmed to see that Rahim was limping badly, and the back of his jacket was covered in sweat. The man had a fever. I had also seen it in his eyes. He was clearly a soldier, some sort of extremely fit, but he was also hurt. It was also willpower. It was only willpower that was keeping him going. Even so, they maintained a fast pace for the next 15 minutes, finally arriving at a clear dominated by a huge Kigelia africana, a sausage tree, and strange black pods hanging down from the branches. This is where Rahim had set up a makeshift camp. I saw a backpack, a few tins of food, and at least this answer of his questions. A parachute made of black silk, bunched up and tucked under a bush. A very sophisticated-looking gun was leaning against the trunk of the tree. It was a Dragunov SVD-59 gas-operated sniper rifle built in Russia, but used extensively by the Indian Army. Rahim went over to the backpack and took out a spare T-shirt. He threw it to Alex. Here, you can wear this. He opened a water bottle and drank, then offered it to Alex. Alex took a swig. The water was warm and tasted of chemicals. You were in Scotland, Alex said. Yes. Rahim was exhausted. The sweat was pouring down his face, and he was breathing heavily, fighting against the fever. I only saw that once. One of his legs was bleeding. He was probably bandaged underneath the trouser, but the blood was seeping through. Rahim sat down and began to untie his shoelaces. He was wearing heavy combat boots. How safe are we here? Not safe. The Kikuyu will be able to track us. Maybe McCain would think you were dead, but he is also already nervous. He will not take any chances. You're hurt. Alex handed the water bottle. What can I do to help you? I was unlucky. Rahim drank a second time. I parachuted in last night. I just remembered hearing a plane. It passed over the safari camp. I landed badly in the thorn bush and cut my leg open. The wound had become infected, but I have taken antibiotics and I will recover. There's nothing you can do. But you told me your name, but you haven't said why you're here. You've told me your name, but you haven't said why you were here. I didn't reply. I thought he worked it out for himself. You were at Kilmerd Castle, so you must be interested in McCain. Rahim nodded. Who are you working for? Rahim took a deep breath and shifted his position. The movement caused him pain. I know who you are, he said. You are Alex Ryder. You are a part-time operator working with the Special Operations Division of MI6. They're looking for you. They put out a call to every intelligence service, including mine. But you didn't come here looking for me. I did not expect to find you here, Alex. Rahim smiled, and at that moment Alex saw how young he was. Perhaps only 23 or 4. There might be less than 10 years between them. He was sent here for the reason only. It was the same reason that I was sent for Kilmerd Castle. This is now the second time you've got in my way. I am here to kill Desmond McCain. Why? There were so many questions Alex had wanted to ask. He was there with the clock ticking. The guards would have come looking for them at any time. But at least the rifle might put the odds more on their side. Rahim took a plastic bottle out of his pocket. I will tell you, he said. He tipped 2 pills into the palm of his hand and dry swallowed them. He commenced. I'm a spy like you, Alex. I belong to a division of the Indian Secret Service called RAW. It stands for Research and Analyze Wing, and it deals in counter-terrorism, foreign affairs and covert action. My own department goes further than that. Our activities often come under a single word: revenge. This is about the nuclear power station, I said. The one that McCain tried to destroy? I have nodded. The Jawala facility in Chennai. We know that he bribed a man by the name of Ravi Chandra to carry the device into the building. It was a lamentable lapse in security. Security at Jawala was in general disgrace. Fortunately, we were unable to question Chandra because he died in the initial explosion. McCain took a great deal of care. There were a number of connections between him and the man who paid Chandra. We investigated, and in the end, we found a link with first aid. Suddenly everything made sense. Even so, we cannot prove the case against McCain, but nor do we need to. Sometimes Raw deals with its enemies. In a simpler and more direct way, I was sent to Scotland to kill him there. I was checking out the castle when your car went off the road and into the lodge. That was fortunate for you, and it's even more fortunate that I should be here the second time. That business with the crocodiles, Graham gave Alex a ghost of a smile. I've never seen anything like that. How are you going to kill him? I asked. I was planning to shoot him, but as I discovered last night, that will not be as easy as I thought. He is well protected by his guards. However, I have come prepared. I can also blow up his plane. You have a plastic explosive? Of course. I'm just in his backpack. McCain flies a 4-seater Cessna 172 Skyhawk. I nodded grimly. That must have been what brought me here. I will blow it up in midair in a way that is better option. It is part of my brief that Raw should not be seen but to be involved. A bomb, I think, will be more enormous than a bullet. I'm afraid you would have to think again. Rahim. Alice went over to the Indian agent and sat down next to him. Sources already raced ahead. I have to contact MI6, he said. You want to let them know you are safe. More than that, do you have a radio? I have a laptop equipped with a demodulator. It would produce baseband output signal that you can be picked up by satellite. Do you have an address? No. He only clear to Alex. In all missions he had undertaken MI6, they had never once given him an email address or a phone number. On the other hand, he'd been supplied with gadgets. What about the calculator with the built-in communication system? It was a shame he hadn't put it in his pocket when he was snatched. It's not a problem, Maham said. We can contact the intelligence bureau in New Delhi. They will pass on any message to Liverpool Street. What is it you want to say? Quickly, I told Rahim everything I had learned from Desmond McCain the night before the genetically modified wheat crop the spores. Plan to poison half the continent. We have less time than you thought, he said. Killing McCain right now isn't going to do anyone any good. We have to go to North Simba Valley. It's only 3 miles from. Ahim shook his head. I'm sorry, Alex. I don't have enough explosive to blow up an entire wheat field. That's not my idea. Alex was weighing up what McCain had told him and what he had seen from where himself when he was in the crop duster. There's a plan called the Simba Dam. There's a place called the Simba Dam, he explained. It's on the edge of a big lake. I saw it from the plane. If we could blow it up, we could flood the valley. We could put the whole crop underwater before there's a chance to do any harm. But we have to do it today, right now. McCain said the spores would start at sunset. It must be early afternoon now. Alex, I know this dam, Rahim said. I studied the whole area before I parachuted in. It is what is known as a double curvative arch dam. It curves against the side of the valley and also against the valley floor, making it doubly strong. I have just 1 kilogram of it, plastic explosive. There will not be nearly enough to make a crack in the wall. Then we must have some sort of pipe or valve. There will be a whole series of pipes carrying the water down the hill. The Simba Dam is used for irrigation purposes, but we're also to hydroelectric turbines. Alex was impressed. Rahim had clearly done his homework. It might be possible to attack the bomb outlet valve or the score valve that is next to it. Either of them would release enormous amounts of water. He shook his head, but it cannot be done. Why not? Because I cannot do it. My leg is infected. I was barely able to limp to the river. The Simba Dam is over 3 miles from here. I could go on my own. That I will not allow. I saw for a minute. You parachuted in, he said. How are you planning to leave? McCain has a crop duster as well as a Skyhawk. I imagine he could use it to spread the spore that you described. I studied. He remembered all too well when he had pulled the lever. I can fly, Rahim went on. I was intended to steal it. Then you can fly me to the dam? There is nowhere to land. I may be able to slow the plane to as little as 35 miles per hour. Fly low over the water will allow you to jump. But even so, the chances are high that you would be killed. Alex lost his temper. We can't just sit back and do nothing. No, Alex. We can contact the intelligence bureau, and as I have already suggested, they will in turn speak to the British authorities. Together they will know what to do. Rahim went on quickly, before I could interrupt him. I have my instructions. I'm here to kill McCain. I was acting improperly when I decided to rescue you, and I can assure you my superiors will not be amused when I make my report. He broke off. He was sweating again, and his eyes were unfocused. My laptop. Rahim pointed at the backpack. He was too weak to go over himself. Alex stood up. He went over to the backpack and opened it. Everything was packed neatly inside. There was a laptop, a mask, a compass, and ammunition for the dragovoning of medical supplies, spare clothes, and food. Most of the space was taken up by the silver box, and about the size of a car battery with 2 switches and a clock set behind a glass. I knew at once what it was. Rahim was planning to conceal it in the Skyhawk's hold. Bring it to me, Rahim said. Alex left the bomb and carried the laptop over. Rahim opened it and booted it up, and then handed it across. It'll be easier if you do it, he said. But I suggest that you don't take long. We will have to move from this place before the Kikuyu come looking for us, and I need to break into the Skyhawk and prepare it for its last flight. Alex crouched down. It felt weird to be tapping away at a keyboard sitting in the dust in the middle of the African bush. He wondered what either the British or the Indian authorities would be able to do. Another 5 hours and it might be too late. He briefly outlined the location of the valley. The crop that McCain was wearing this plan to bring famine and disease to Kenya. Finally, he added a P.S. Please let Jack Starbright know where I am and tell her I am all right. If there was one good thing to come out of all this, it was that Jack would know he hadn't been hurt. He quickly read the page over and pressed send. Alex looked up. Rahim had slumped forward. Alex went over and examined him. The raw agent was unconscious, breathing heavily. He had been knocked out either by the fever or the medicine. He had been taken to fight it. Alex eased him gently to the ground, then looked back in the direction of the camp. Everything was silent in the bush, as even the animals slept in the afternoon sun. It was very hot, but at least Rahim was tucked away in the shadow of the sausage tree. What would London do when they received the news? Alex had visions of Alan Blunt and Miss Jones conferring with the appropriate ministers at Downing Street. A new government had recently been voted in. They probably wouldn't even know how he existed. They would have to persuade he was reliable, that his information was accurate. And then they would have to make a decision. What exactly were their opinions? They could send in troops with flamethrowers. That might take days. In fact, Alex could be certain that the Indian Secret Service would even pass the message on in time. After all, they had their own agenda. They simply wanted McCain dead. He didn't like it, but he knew what he had to do. He took the map out of Rahim's backpack and studied it. Simba River Camp was clearly marked. There was a track that he had seen from the air. It led all the way to the dam rising up the side of the valley. He would follow the river for the first half mile, then cut across the side. It wouldn't be too difficult to pick up the track. There was electricity up there. He had seen one of the pylons. If he could find it again, it would lead him to the dam. Finally, Alex examined the bomb. It wasn't very complicated. All he had to do was set the timer, which operated like an ordinary alarm clock, then activated by throwing a single switch. What was it that Rahim had told him? He had to locate one of the top 2 main valves. That was where he would place the bomb. Alex left Rahim the medicine and supplies, then put on the backpack and tightened the straps. He felt bad walking out on the agent. particularly after he had just saved his life. But at least he could make sure that he wasn't found by the guards. He would follow the path that back to the bank where he had first been taken. He would do his best to cover his tracks, and then he would set off in another direction, making sure that he